Welcome back, nerds and nerdettes, to Bearstow's Barnstormers. I'm going to be quick off the line in this one as we plunge right in. This project took extreme advantage of the vast amount of released technical data about the Iowa-class gun turret. The OP-769 is an extremely interesting book of technical data and has an image of pretty much anything within the gun turret for reference. I consulted it frequently during this project for things I didn't have pictures of personally. Today's episode revolves around the lower decks of the turret rotating assembly. These decks are the powder handling floor, the lower projectile flat, and the upper projectile flat. This build series will be split up into 4 episodes. Episode 2 will be the gun house, Episode 3 will be the barbette, Episode 4 will be the electric deck, and we've already covered this episode. The electric deck's going to come last because this is a dynamic model. The turret will rotate and the guns will independently elevate as they do on the actual ships. The mechanism designed into this model mirrors the real-life version of the gun turret. What I mean by that is that the mechanism used is the same as the actual gun, and within reason I tried to keep the placement of the motors in the same position as well. As a result, the electric deck is extremely complicated, and that's why it's going to be last. As we move through the parts needed to build the gun, let's start with the powder handling floor, and we're going to go ahead and move up the decks from there. Powder used to propel the projectiles is kept in 80-pound powder bags. The powder itself is molded into pellets kept within the bags, and there's a priming charge on one face of the bag in order to help ignite the powder bag when it's in the gun. The bags are stored within the magazines around the gun turret, not the powder handling room. The intent here is to protect the magazine from plunging fire or armor-piercing bombs dropped through the structure of the turret. Additionally, the turret contains 79 crew members, and containing any powder explosion outside the turret is important for their survival and the survival of the ship, based on what we saw with events like USS Arizona. The bags are passed through 2 sealed bulkheads to get into the turret structure to the powder handling floor through devices called scuttles. The scuttles are not in this video as they're mounted on the outside walls of the barbette around the turret or the powder handling room. You will see them in the barbette episode, however. From the scuttles, the bags are moved to the powder stackers manually. Powder stackers are on the sides of the powder hoists, and they allow the simultaneous transportation of all 6 powder bags needed to fire each gun. There's crew members down in the powder handling room that have to, ferry these 80-pound powder bags back and forth between the scuttles through the walls and the powder stackers on the side. So they would take 6 bags across to the powder stacker. Once the powder hoist car got down to the powder stackers, they would push all 6 bags into the powder hoist car, and then the powder hoist car would take it up to the breech of the gun. Moving up from the powder handling floor, we get to the lower projectile flat. Each projectile flat and the barbette wall around it provides storage for 212 projectiles. Turrets 1 and 3 only have these areas for storage. Turret 2 has an additional mezzanine that allows another 195 projectiles to be kept within the gun turret. The mezzanine is only present on gun turret 2 due to the turret's super firing position. Super firing means that turret 2 is mounted above turret 1 in the ship's profile. You can see that in the top right-hand corner of your screen. This prevents any occlusion of the guns when firing at an acute, oblique angle. So if you're firing off to a shallow angle on the port side, if you did not have a super firing turret 2, there's a condition where gun 3 of turret 2 may be completely occluded by turret 1, and therefore unable to fire and unable to bring its projectiles downrange at the target. So to fix that, they mount turret 2 higher, and that allows all 6 guns from turret 1 and turret 2 to fire without any issues. As a result of this, there's additional space within the hull for the extra storage. USS New Jersey is the only Iowa-class battleship where you can tour this area so far, and I do have a picture of the powder handling room taken from the mezzanine towards the end of the video when I'm comparing the full build up to what I toured on USS New Jersey. This model is the late World War II design of this gun turret, and at the time, there's only really two main projectiles available to the ship. There's a high explosive projectile, which is common to the Colorado class and the North Carolina and South Dakota class. And that projectile is about 5 feet tall. And then there's a 2,700 pound armor piercing projectile that's unique to the Iowa class and is 6 feet tall. Unfortunately for me, when I modeled the projectiles, I only had the blueprint for the Iowa class armor piercing shell, and I didn't know that the high explosive was a different size. Battleship New Jersey has a fantastic YouTube channel where they present a lot of the technical information about the ship, tour different areas that are maybe not accessible for you to visit during a regular visit to the ship. And thanks to the video that I'm linking on screen now, I learned after I glued the projectiles in the upper projectile flat that the high explosive shells are shorter. I did fix this already in the CAD model. It will not be an issue for the next build. It's just something I'm going to have to live with for this prototype. The projectile flat carries its projectiles on projectile rings, one of which I'm painting on screen right now. The projectile ring is able to rotate fully relative to the rotating assembly of the gun turret, and that's done so that you can store projectiles around all 360 degrees of that projectile ring and still be able to maneuver them quickly and easily to the projectile hoists that are mounted in line with the guns themselves. At this stage of the design of the model, the rings don't rotate. I eventually do plan on revising that so that they do get them rotating. I think it'd be really cool to have them rotating. I think it'd just be neat to just watch all those shells being able to rotate and kind of display how it would work on the actual gun. And at this scale, it is possible to do that. From the projectile rings, the projectiles are par-buckled across to the projectile hoists. And what we mean about this is that there's a series of par-buckling capstans around the projectile flat. So those kind of bollards that rotate, or in the par-buckling case, they rotate. They rotate all the time while the turret's in use. They can turn them on, they can turn them off. It's not I'm using this one, so I rotate this one condition. It's if we're rotating and we're in service, we are rotating all of these par-buckling capstans at the same time at the same speed. A rope is secured at one end close to the projectile hoist. It's then wrapped around the bottom of the shell of the projectile, pulled through the projectile hoist, and then wrapped around the par-buckling capstan. For those of you that are not in the engineering field, it does not take a whole lot of kind of tensile force around a capstan with a rope for the friction to build up enough in the capstan rope interface to generate a good amount of tension load along the rope. It doesn't take much, right? Anybody that's also got a boat and is experienced in tying it off also understands this. And as such, the crew member that's standing there wrapping that rope around the capstan doesn't have to pull very hard in order to get a whole lot of tension out of the capstan mechanism, which allows him to very quickly and easily move a 2,700 pound armor piercing 6 foot tall projectile through into the projectile hoist. Speaking of projectiles, you can see how I painted them on screen now. There are quite a few. There's about 110 to 120, somewhere in that range. Between failed prints and lost projectiles, I don't have the exact number. But you can see how I painted them. It was an interesting experience learning the fastest way to paint them with so many. And I did end up, as you saw on screen, printing a kind of like a fixture, little painting jig, to help me get the yellow stripes to be somewhat uniform and common across all of the shell colors. And so it was pretty handy. On the actual ship, on top of the high explosive and the armor piercing projectile, there's also a series of dummy projectiles. So there's one full practice projectile that is for practicing parbuckling. So it's completely inert. There's no intention to fire this shell. It's just used for practice, getting the crews to practice maneuvering the shells across the decks. And then there's also the practice blue projectiles. So if you were to go to some of the museum ships and you see a blue projectile, that is a full practice one. That one can be fired out of the gun, so it's to help the crews practice loading it, moving it up the decks and getting it into the gun and eventually firing it out of the guns. All right, we've covered the actual gun assembly. I think about enough for right now. We're about halfway through this video, more like a third, but anyway, it's probably a good time to start talking about the actual model. So right up off the bat, I need to say a thank you to Hoffman Engineering and his YouTube channel doing 3D printing and laser cutter reviews. Hoffman Engineering's really got what brought me into 3D printing. He helped me get started with my first 3D printer, which was a Tevo Tornado. Working on this project, I started with the actual gun in the gun house. The Tornado's moving y-axis really didn't lend itself well to printing the 11-inch long gun because it would start to wobble. So I'd start to get a little bit of layer separation, and it was honestly a pretty big problem. Hoffman Engineering got me introduced to the Ender 7, which I used to print most of this project. The Ender 7 has a moving z-axis. The x and y stay stationary on the bed, and the nozzle is what moves. So it really corrected the issue I was having with the gun barrels. More recently, I will say he ruined me by introducing me to resin printing, which is what helped me get the shells completed for this. Thankfully, I don't even know how I would have done it without the resin printer. I did have some PLA shells printed, but they really were not up to par that the resin printer was able to give me. So, for those of you that don't already, once you get through slamming your head into my subscribe button, go ahead and check out his channel, and if you enjoy it, give him a follow as well, or a subscription. Kidding about the slamming your head, and also kidding about the subscription. You don't have to. If you're here and you enjoy this and you want to get notified to follow along as each new episode comes out, absolutely go ahead and subscribe. Otherwise, just as long as you're still here, enjoy your time. Happy to have you. Anyway, as I kind of mentioned before, the model is predominantly made out of PLA for prototyping phase. It is done on the Ender 7, so it's almost a full filament model so far. There will be more of it done in resin for the next round, just to get a little bit more detail and to make printing a little easier and faster. I'm about to begin printing the first 7 production versions. I've already kind of talked about that. And my intent is that the first 4 are earmarked as donations for each of the museum ships. So USS Iowa BB-61 is in Long Beach. USS New Jersey BB-62 is in Camden, New Jersey. USS Missouri BB-63 is in Pearl Harbor. And USS Wisconsin BB-64 is in Norfolk, Virginia. Fun fact, USS Missouri is the last battleship completed by the U.S., despite having number 63 and Wisconsin being 64. Wisconsin was laid down after Missouri. They were built at different shipyards, and Wisconsin was finished before Missouri was finished. 2 additional turrets are earmarked for close friends of mine, one of whom has the earliest prototype turret, which was done at 1 to 125 scale. So it's quite a bit smaller, and it looks a good amount like garbage. 1 to 72 really lends itself better to detailing the turret as a whole. And then the final earmarked turret, just in case the main man, Rear Admiral Jingles, ever stumbles his way to these videos and tells me that he wants one, he gets number 7. Just purely for the hours of entertainment I've gotten from him and his channel. Anyway, some of the finer details I kind of mentioned had been made through resin printing, and since I only picked it up in the last month, there'll be many more parts that are resin printed. The powder hoists will be resin printed. I've actually been working on that on the side of recording the audio for this video. And it really just boils down to, it gets more detail, it's a lot more sensitive, the tolerances are a lot tighter, so I can really refine things in. One of the things I did notice putting this together is that the shell hoists leave a good amount of gap to the projectile flat, and I want to really narrow that down and get that corrected for the next round of printing. So that's one of my goals to correct and identify through the prototyping phase. As I steadily start to install all of these projectiles onto the upper projectile ring here, and into the shell hoist, which I thought was a nice little detail to throw in there, you'll understand why the ring was designed to rotate within the actual gun turrets on the actual ships. It makes it significantly easier for the projectiles to be loaded up into their stowed positions, and it makes it easier for them to get to the shell hoists. Unfortunately, on this model, both the projectile rings got stuck, both the lower end and upper projectile rings got stuck to the projectile flat decks. I think it was because the paint was not entirely cured at the time, and eventually did cure with it in contact. I was able to break the upper ring free and rotate it. The lower ring wouldn't budge, and I kind of knocked loose a couple of the small dividers that go between each of the projectiles. Again, more notes for construction in the next round, and this is one of the parts that I likely will transition over to be resin printed for the next iteration. The projectiles installed on the upper ring also had a little bit of an elephant's foot going on, which is where the base that attaches to the moving bed of the resin printer is flared out just a little bit compared to the rest of the profile. This prevented them from fitting as intended within the footprint of the ring. Again, more notes for the future. Took it to heart. I actually adapted it and sanded that out for the lower projectiles, and they did fit a lot better. I don't have a whole clear shot for that because of where they are on the deck and the model. It's hard to get the camera to focus in there. I will say, however, I'm not looking forward to printing and installing the projectiles for the next batch of 7 gun turrets. 212 per deck, times 2 per turret, times 7 turrets, if I were to do all of them. I likely won't, but I'm going to do a healthy portion of them, and it's still going to be a lot of projectiles. I've already started just printing batches. When the printer's not got anything queued up, I just go ahead and run a batch of 20 projectiles and bag them up ready for paint when the time comes. I am going to definitely need to design out a better painting fixture, the device you saw me use earlier to get the yellow stripe correct. I'm going to need something that's a little faster, can handle more of them, or maybe I just need multiple. That might be a better idea, just to get a few and set up a bunch of shells really quickly and just go down the line. The CAD, or computer-aided design model, for this 3D print was entirely created by me in SolidWorks. There's no pre-designed, pre-downloaded, or anybody else's work in the computer model for this assembly. I wanted to do that and to get it right, I used the blueprints, I used the turret diagrams, and a lot of photographs taken by myself and by other people. Actually, there you saw me rotate the turret ring, or the shell projectile ring. Anyway, circling back, I did use a lot of photographs taken both by myself and by other people available on the internet, just to get everything to look as close as possible. This is one of the examples where being able to go into the barbette of USS New Jersey and visit the lower projectile flat and the powder handling room of Turret 2 does come in really handy. Unfortunately, USS New Jersey is over a day's comfortable drive away from me, so opportunities to go out to that ship aren't exactly plentiful, although I did make it out there last year. Their YouTube channel, again, as I've mentioned previously, is very helpful, and every now and then in the background of one of their videos I'll see the exact detail that I need to finish the model, and I'll pause it and leave it stuck on that frame for hours until I get it right. I originally designed the model at 1 to 125 scale. What's the significance of that scale, you may ask? Well, story time. When I was in middle school, back in the Stone Age, I entered a history fair and built a 5-foot model of USS Arizona. The funny thing about this is that the history fair had a size limit on its exhibits, which a 5-foot long, styrofoam battleship definitely exceeded. So I was immediately disqualified. But I still had fun. So win, lose, whatever. I enjoyed it. To scale at 5 feet, it's about 1 to 125 for USS Arizona, and from then on I just kind of adopted the scale, and I just kind of ran with it. I built a couple of ships roughly at that scale, none of which have survived, which is probably a good thing because my build quality now compared to back then has changed ever so slightly, and I'm okay with that. But after printing the first prototype of the gun turret, back to the focal point of this video, I realized that it was far too small really to do anything with. The filament printers couldn't really keep up with the scale. The finer details just wouldn't really work out very well on it. And so I finished printing up a rough outline of what the turret would look like full assembly before kind of discarding it. Gave it to a friend as a placeholder for his 1 to 72nd turret, after which I'm hoping he throws it in the trash. I know you're listening. Throw it in the trash. So about 2 months afterwards, I went ahead and started designing out the 1 to 72nd version. 1 to 72nd obviously is a common scale, mostly for airplane models, although there are some ship models at 1 to 72nd scale as well. Technically, my printers could push me to 1 to 48 scale, which is my preferred scale. And while I have thought about that for multiple nights when I'm lying awake, unable to get to sleep, refocusing. Pushing to 1 to 48 scale, I'm not entirely comfortable adapting to that scale yet, mostly because I don't want to delay this project for another 2 years to redesign all of the parts. There are quite a few parts within the electric deck and within the gun house where the size of the wall thickness is more, it's decided more for practical reasons than it is for actual scale accuracy. And, the motor mounts and things that we'll get to eventually for training and for elevating, a lot of those are based around, again, pragmatic decisions for scale. They're not in any way, shape, or form accurate purely because of printer limitations. Now, the resin printer is going to change that very slightly, as it, as previously discussed, is more accurate, and it's more it's better able to handle the details. So, real quick, you could see me try and break the lower projectile ring loose there, but it didn't work, and I just kept breaking the little tabs that divide the shells, so I left it alone. But anyway, so instead of just being able to scale the turret features in a printing program, which in theory I could do, it just wouldn't entirely come out correctly. But yeah, I'd have to go back and redesign quite a lot of it, and I just didn't entirely want to do that at this phase of the project. This is a continuing evolution, as I've mentioned before, and based on the work I've done in the background while recording this video, I've made the decision that the next iteration will have a resin-printed powder hoist. This should remove the need to individually glue parts together like I'm doing here for the powder stacker and for the framing that goes around the powder stacker, and should allow me to potentially add some internal detail to the hoist operator stations, which are very cramped but very cool on the actual ships. For those that have the ability to visit USS North Carolina, you can walk right up to the hatches that open up into the back of the powder hoist, and you can see that position. It's pretty neat. Like, it is really, really cool to look at that and also realize that, a full-grown man standing in there for hours at a time, like, it's a little wild to just sit and look at that space and really give it some thought. Going through the details, while painting the powder stacker, I did have issues finding a brass paint that was to my liking. If my previous videos are anything to go by, about 20% of you are still watching at this point. If you have any recommendations as to good brass paints, please leave me a comment. So far I'm using Mr. Metal Color Brass, and I haven't really tried polishing it yet, and I'd like to do some extra work on it that way. and see if I can get the color right. So far it hasn't been exactly what I'm looking for compared to naval brass. As we're getting to the end of the video now, with about 2-ish minutes to go, hold on tight, we're almost there, I promise. Yeah, so this is just final assembly here. We're putting the part buckling capstans in place. Again, you get some nice shots of the projectiles that I have sitting in the hoist between the lower and upper deck. I did put a projectile, I think it's in the lower hoist, on the gun 3 position, so the right hand from this current view. Again, just a nice little detail, I thought, just to really round it out. The powder bags do need some work. I was just throwing it together to have a little bit of detail in here, but I was happy with it when I installed it, even though in this shot I do install it backwards. For those that aren't familiar, the red circle is the primer charge. The powder won't ignite without the primer, so it is important to get that in the correct orientation for next time, which I did actually fix it off screen. Not an issue. Anyway, so as we wrap up, casual reminder, if you haven't already and you feel like it, go like, subscribe, comment, leave me your recommendations for brass paint, please, and enjoy some comparative shots between USS New Jersey and the model, and the CAD model, and then of course the finished product. I'm very happy with the way it came out. Overall, I think it really does it justice, and I really do appreciate just honestly just the way it came out. I can't say anything else than that. It's really cool to look at, and it's really cool to work on as well. And my fiance is sitting here giggling at me nerding out, and I'm definitely leaving this in the video. Get over it. But yeah, so the shells really do make it, even though they're not all there. I think it really pulls it together. Anyway, thank you all for watching. It's been my pleasure to present this to you, and feel free to leave your thoughts down below. I'm excited to get any feedback for this, and we will see you in the next one.